Essentially, playing the Caro-Kann happens when your opponent is playing e4 and you respond with this move. The main move that is played here is d4. This is what everybody is going to play against you anyway. You're going to play this. Your opponent has 5 ways to answer here. Either he pushes the pawn, and this is the advanced variation, or he can develop his knight and put it on c3, which is the classical variation. He can also take the pawn, which would be the exchange variation. He can also play a move like this, which is the fantasy variation. That is quite dangerous. You have to know exactly how to play against it. It looks super weird at first because this pawn here is taking actually the square of the natural square of the knight, and I'm going to show you how to play against it. Let's see first what happens on the exchange variation. Well, you're going to take back always with the pawn. You don't want to be taking back with the queen for obvious reasons. You give him a tempo. He's going to attack you playing c4 straight away. He can also play the knight here, like this, attacking the queen, so you don't want this. So when he takes, I want you to take back with the pawn. And now he has different ways to play. But the main move is to play what we call the Panov attack. He's going to be challenging and he doesn't mind actually having you take the pawn and having an isolated pawn after this. Develop your pieces. You're always going to develop your pieces like this. He's going to put the knight here and now you're going to play e6. They have different ways to play. The main variation, they're going to develop the knight. You're going to develop your bishop because what you want is to be able to castle as quickly as possible in this situation. He's going to take and you take back with the knight. Taking back with the pawn here is quite dull and boring, honestly. It's quite boring. I mean, this is symmetrical situation here in the center. And most likely this position is going to end up in a draw. I mean, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that in your games, people will make like 59 mistakes before you actually get to a result. I get it. But usually there is not so much play. What you want when there is an isolated pawn, you want to be putting a knight behind it. This is called a blockade. This is the best way actually to block an isolated pawn. And now he's going to develop his piece, and now you castle and he castles. And he gives this kind of situation where you're always going to play the same moves. The knight is going to come here, and then you're going to push b6. Let me show you. You do this. He's going to play something like a3 here, and then you could play something like this, b6. And then your idea is to actually put the bishop on b7. Okay? He could also, in this situation, which is better, he could actually, instead of putting the bishop here, he could put it on d3 because he would have a target actually on h7 when you castle. And again, you play the same moves. Knight c6. When he castles, you castle. And then he doesn't want you to play moves like this. And then you play b6 and the bishop will come to b7. The rook will come here and you will finish your development like this. Let me show you a few moves. Let's say they play the rook here, the bishop comes here. And usually what they do, they retreat the bishop to put the queen here and have an attack actually on your king. So let's say they play this. You play rook c8, for instance, here, and they play queen d3. You have to be careful because you can get checkmated on the next move here. But you have g6. This is fine. And usually they take this opportunity to put the bishop actually here, attacking your rook. You just move the rook. And it gives, this is kind of a standard position that is totally equal. What if they push the pawn and they say, I want to have a fixed center like this. You have different ways to play. The main move here is to play bishop f5. You want to be putting Bob out here before you push the pawn. Because if you push the pawn now, this one is totally in jail. And you don't know where to put it. You don't know where to put this one. Now it's blocked. And then after you push the pawn on e6, so you can actually develop this bishop. That's the way to play. And here they have different ways to actually answer. You have to be careful when they play this. Because now, if you push the pawn, you're in big trouble and you lose the game because they're going to push this one and this one is trapped. Because even if he comes here, he gets attacked by a pawn, he goes here, and well done, you lost a piece after 7 moves with black. Don't close your bishop, so your bishop actually, when you don't play this move, can, wow, what an arrow, can always actually come back, okay? So you want to keep this option. And what I like to play here is this move, a6. I think that's a very interesting move because now their point actually was to just push this pawn next. But now you don't have to go here, obviously, because we know what's going to happen to us, right? But you can actually go back here. And that's a very interesting, actually, position. So you kind of wasted the tempo, but a6 is a very interesting move because one day when you push this pawn, well, this pawn is still basically controlling this square, which means the bishop cannot come here, etc. So bishop d7 is quite interesting. And they have to be careful here. If they play moves like this, usually they continue like this. Now you push e6, and then your point is going to be always the same. You're going to push the pawn here to put pressure on this one. This queen is going to come to this square, putting pressure here and also putting pressure basically on d4. The knight is going to come out here or here. It depends. The first thing you have to think about here, if they go, for instance, c4. If they go c4, you can counter straight away in the center by playing c5. You don't care, actually. I mean, this is not too scary. And you're telling me, yeah, but I have an isolated pawn, so I have to be careful here. Yes, but there is some tactic. They cannot actually take here because otherwise there is this move. And now you're attacking this, and you're also threatening a nice little move, bishop c6, which would attack the queen and the rook, and they would lose the game. This position is, I can say this position is winning for black already. But, you know, solid people, solid players can decide to actually play this. Just a simple move. Now you're not in trouble of actually this move because the queen doesn't control it, which means you would be able to actually take the pawn if he pushes. So now you can play e6. And the point for you is going to be always the same. It's going to be, the moves are going to be, again, very automatic. The knight is going to come here. This one is going to come here. And you're going to try to push on c5. So let me show you. Now he goes bishop e2 and you go knight e7. You develop the knight first. Why? Because if you put the bishop here, you see how this knight actually is super ugly. You don't have any square. You can't put it here because the bishop is going to take it. And when he castles, you can either decide to put the knight here to basically sustain actually the push of c5. You have to counter with c5, you know, at some point, basically to counter and put pressure on d4. This is your play and your plan here. Then what's going to happen? This bishop, you can put it here or here, which means you free the square, and then the knight goes there, because the knight there attack again this point, d4. The bishop is going to come here, and then you castle. So you're kind of like always going to play this way. That's the plan in the advanced variation. What if he plays the classical? The classical, he can put the knight here, or he can put it here. But that's essentially the same thing, because you're always going to take this. So the knight is always going to end up actually on this square, right? The reason why some people actually play knight d2 is that they don't want to block this pawn, so they can play this or this later. Because if they put it here, well, this pawn is totally blocked. Remember, you always take in the center, and when they take back, bob again. Same move. That's why I like the Caro-Kann also for beginners, because it's quite easy to remember the plans. So you attack this one. This one doesn't have a good square to go to. And usually what he does, he gains a tempo on the bishop, and you put your bishop here. And usually the most tactical way to play, an aggressive way for white, is to go like this. They're threatening to win the bishop. So you have to be careful about this, right? You have to create a little window, because when he pushes, you go and hide here. Now they develop their knights before bishops, right? And they're threatening a move like knight c5. You don't want them to put a knight in the center. It's super powerful, a knight in the center. It controls 8 squares. You don't want this. So what do? You put the knight on d7, so he doesn't have basically this move, okay? And then your moves from here are pretty much going to be automatic again. This bishop is pretty powerful, right? I mean, it controls like very interesting diagonal. And also this king, usually you long castle. So because you long castle, you can't have a bishop like this who's eyeing your king this way. So what you do is that usually you get rid of it. Like this. I have to take, and the queen takes back. And now you play e6. because you want to be developing this bishop. You want also to put the knight here. This bishop is going to go here or here. I mean, however you want to put it. And then it's going to be short castle or long castle in certain variations. But that's pretty much the plan that you have here. Let me show you one variations. Let's see. Oh, queen. What did I do? Oh, yeah, e6, the last move. Now he puts the bishop here because he wants to long castle, and you develop your knight. And he longs castle. Now you develop your bishop. You see how everything is super harmonious, right? And usually, the main move in this situation is to put the knight on e4. Now you exchange the knight, and put the other one at its place, attacking the queen. The queen retreats, and now the best move in this situation is to centralize your queen by playing this. You're attacking a pawn, and also you want to exchange queens. Because this endgame actually for black is pretty solid, there is no weaknesses in the pawn structure, and you're quite happy to go in the endgame. But let me tell you something, I mean, most of the Caro-Kann end in a draw if played properly, right? I mean, it's not an opening where you're gonna crush your friend super fast. I mean, if your friend plays very badly, obviously you can crush him, but you see what I mean, right? That's kind of like a solid way to play. That's the reason why grandmasters usually, you know, they try to avoid and they try to play the most sharp lines with white because they don't have chances to actually win in the game. So here usually they play this, and then you come here and they exchange the queens like this, and you're targeting basically a nice little fork, and then they put the bishop here. All this is theory. It's very well known, I mean, at the professional level. And here I think you should play this move, f5. This is the most interesting. I know it looks horrible to actually play this kind of moves because you're thinking, what am I doing with this pawn now? Why am I giving him this square that I can never control with a pawn anymore? I get it. But you have some tactical justifications. You know, in chess, you're going to learn the rules, and then you're going to learn to break them. So your point here is that you're trying to play this, because when he takes, there is a fork. Okay? So it's not easy for him to actually defend here. Usually what they have to do this, which means they overprotect the pawn, which means pushing is just a sacrifice of pawn now, because you can just take it, right? And here what you do is just castle. And this position is a very interesting position where essentially you gave actually this square, but it doesn't really matter because you will be able to actually exchange it at some point. Then you can break by playing this kind of structures. You want to bring the rook here and this one here. And this is your plan here, but we're pretty far already. So this was the classical variation. Now they can play something else that is the fantasy, and you have to be super careful about the fantasy variation, because if you take, well, what they're telling you is just, okay, I'm gonna take, and then I told you, I mean, this rook is gonna come here when he castles, attacking actually the king. So you have to be careful, they're opening lines. But here there is a move that is quite interesting, which is this one. Basically what you're saying, if he takes, well, he's doomed because there is this check. And it's also attacking actually the pawn here. So if they play this, you get the rook, right? Because it's a fork. And otherwise they move the king and it's a disaster for them. So taking actually this pawn is not an option. The main move is just playing knight to f3, where they defend this. And in this situation you can take. And here their plan is not to take back actually. They don't want to take back this. Their plan when they play the f3, the fantasy, is to just attack you and make sure that you crumble under pressure and just get destroyed very quickly. So they play this and you have to be careful. You see, this is your biggest weakness here. This is the biggest weakness. But here you can play knight f6. No. No, I made a mistake here. No. The move is knight d7. So you want to be controlling actually, so the knight doesn't come here, okay? And now also, if they play this now, trying to attack here, after this move, it doesn't do anything because you play knight e5, you're defending, gaining a tempo on this. But you have to know a very crazy line, which is a piece sacrifice. You see, he castles. He tells you basically, I do not care about this bishop. Because when you take, now he will take here. And you see there is a fork. It's not easy to play. This is better for black after this move. This is better for black. But this is, I mean, this is sport. Like, honestly. You know, he's going to take on h8, and you're just going to develop the bishop. You will take this one back, because this one can never actually, you know, leave. And you will long castle. And you will play the game like this. Because if he plays a move like queen h5, for instance, you just have this move. And he has to leave. Or he can usually just sacrifice back and take like this. What you're going to do is bishop f7. I mean, that's, I told you the fantasy variation is pretty crazy, right? And you play like this, but you know what? It's better for black. In terms of material, you just develop your pieces, and then you're going to long castle, and you're going to bring actually the rook and attack him, basically, on the king side. So, we're going a bit too deep. That's not the point, actually, of this. So, when he plays bishop c4, and you play this, the main move is to actually castle here. Here you can play the knight here. And most people that you play against will do this. Most people. They just want you. They just want to crush you. So they're just going for it. And here you can just play the same move. This move is so crucial because it defends, it attacks. I like it. And here what they can do is sacrifice and take on f7. Because when you take, they take back. You take with the king, and at the end of the variation, there is this little crazy move, because you're pinned with the knight. So, are we doomed? No, we're not. We have this move, queen d5. Very important move, you're gonna understand why. Because when they take, and you take back, they do not have the move queen h5 check, which would be a disaster. Obviously, because you put the queen and you're controlling the square. And this position, my friend, is better for you. It's better. He's going to develop a knight. You're going to put the rook here. Turns out, actually, his king is much weaker than yours. You know, so he's going to try to exchange queens here, which you're happy to do. You know, this kind of positions you can play. And this is an endgame. You have the bishop pair, which is amazing. Always a very, very big edge to have it, especially in open position like this. I mean, the center is not closed, so there is a lot of space for the bishops to just, you know, destroy you. So that was the fantasy. As you can see, you have to take this one seriously. And at your level, I believe that a lot of people actually will play this move. I hope I didn't basically destroy your brain with all this. You don't need some headache pills after this lesson. I covered the variations, but I didn't basically go too deep into it. But so that you can understand actually the plans. Go try it out. If you want to go dig deep into it, feel free to do it. Play it, get the experience.